Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gill. Oops. Sorry, it didn't show that Twitter went up. But for those listening on Facebook, great to have you with us. My name is Josh Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. And we are here to discuss the season one finale of The Bad Batch. With me is Tom and Christina. And we are going to go on this Poseidon adventure of the season one finale. And I got to say, I'll just open it up and saying, I loved it because it went against all expectations of how to have one of these season finales go. And I thought that was a really good move on their part. Christina, your reaction?
I loved it. We saw it actually kind of late on Friday, so we were kind of chomping at the bit to watch it because we were avoiding spoilers. While we heard Richard's general sort of, "This was great, this is wonderful," but nothing specific. And it like you said, it was not necessarily what was expected. I'm very glad that they stayed on Kamino and stayed. The tension level was so high throughout. It was excellent.
Yeah, it would have been. I agree with you completely. I sort of expected some showdown with Rampart or something. They make it up to the Star Destroyer, but it really highlighted that this team isn't invincible. It's not. They're not all powerful, and they have to deal with legitimate problems. One of those being getting stuck in the middle of a low orbit bombardment from multiple Star Destroyers, and they don't just have a magic way out of that. They have to fight the entire episode. So to have that, and whatever they do with Rampart and Crosshair and the other Imperial characters next season, to have that be saved and have that tension point be off somewhere in the future, I think was really good. And they're literally fighting their own home as it's collapsing around them. That's sort of the Empire pulls out, and they're fighting to survive against the place where they were born. And I thought that was really powerful.
I agree. And I immediately thought of Poseidon Adventure, the original, Leslie Nielsen as the doomed captain, and Gene Hackman. And yeah, it was just, again, most macho for the 1970s. And also Titanic, with the way that the city's breaking apart and it doing a final plunge. All of that very reminiscent of what James Cameron did in his Titanic movie. So I thought that was great and clever because who saw that coming? Like Clone Wars ends with a mass burial. And it's fighting to get off the ship, but they are shooting their way out of it. This is radically different. And ironically, not a ton of legal issues, but there are a couple that we can get into because necessity defense is like the trump card for like blowing up windows and cutting through things because it sank. Normally, you don't use explosives in a lab, but we are now.
Place is a trash heap as is. That thing is sinking and abandoned, although the abandonment may have not been voluntary. So to speak. But yeah, I don't think any Kaminoans are going to come back around and be upset that they blew out a window on their sunken city.
Nope.
That would be what the legal term there would be, a moot point.
Now, the Kaminoans suing the Empire, that's a different situation. We can talk about that in a moment. But let's get into the other thing I noticed, when they get hit and everyone gets knocked out briefly, they do have the Saving Private Ryan noise as everyone's disorientated from a close explosion that happens. So let's get to the legal analysis. And the first up is the duty to rescue Crosshair. They're knocked out. Omega comes to in a flooding compartment. Crosshair is trapped under debris. And they kind of put him there because he was riding over Wrecker's shoulder as they're trying to escape because they didn't leave him to die in the first place. Is there a duty to rescue him? And Christina, is there a special relationship at that point, uh, before he wakes up and then after he wakes up?
I don't think so. They did make the choice to haul him in there. I guess they could have left him where he was, but they did, make the choice to bring him into that spot. I don't think leaving him where it was going to be any safer than where he ended up. But I guess he could argue that because he wouldn't have been there but for them. So perhaps that might have been an argument he could make. But ultimately, I don't think that. I think that Omega made the choice to save him for both practical and moral reasons. She, felt very strongly that he needed to be saved, but also he could have helped her get out of there. It was, she would have needed, she might have needed help in getting out of there, and he might have been a way of doing so. But I think more for her, it was that he was a person, her brother, that she cared about, and she wanted to make sure that he was okay if it was in her ability to do so.
So let's put another spin on that. Thomas, the duty to rescue has the situation of the drowning swimmer, and that the rescuer goes out, they get the drowning swimmer, and they're swimming back in, and the rescuer goes, "I'm tired," and lets the victim go to drown again. There's a problem with that. You can't abandon the rescue. If they had not saved Crosshair from the debris, would that have been abandoning the rescue in the first place that started in the shooting gallery that they took him from?
Well, the law certainly doesn't contemplate a situation where your duty to rescue is stuck to the point where you must give up your own life in order to complete that duty, lest you fail it. And so in this situation, AZ's a machine. His duty comes from his own programming, maybe not some legal requirement. But I would say, one wrinkle in the fabric here is that Omega is a minor, so that it's questionable whether, as a minor, she has any duty to rescue anyone under the law. But her life is in mortal peril at that point in time. This compartment is flooding. She is certainly young and sort of, at least from a physical perspective, ill-equipped to deal with this sort of situation. And so it certainly seems like patently unfair to saddle her with the legal requirement to potentially die or breach that duty if one were to exist. So were the situation different if she's up, safely on a platform and he's down in trouble, maybe the circumstances on that level are a little bit different. But under the facts as we have them, with this rapidly flooding compartment and the danger here, I don't see her being saddled with a legal duty to rescue him.
That raises the question with the squad and opening the door to get Omega out and then to get Crosshair, on whether or not there's a special relationship in order to get Omega, since she is a minor that's older than them, and Crosshair, who they were in the process of rescuing to begin with. Like, if they didn't go back for him, would that have been an abandonment of the rescue? And
just not catch him as he comes through the door.
Yeah.
See ya.
Yeah.
Just let him keep on sliding down into
because they would be
oblivion.
then putting him into a worse situation than he was in the shooting gallery.
Maybe.
The interesting wrinkle here beyond our civilian duty to rescue is that of the law of armed conflict, and whether there's a duty that arises to either rescue or treat Crosshair that arises because of his status as a combatant, or the fact that there's on some level a war going on. There's conflict, armed conflict happening that in fact, armed conflict that resulted in the situation that they're in right now. And interestingly, so we talk a lot about things like the Geneva Conventions and whatnot. A lot of those rules, a lot of those foundational international rules that govern the law of armed conflict wouldn't apply here because they apply to what are known as international armed conflicts, conflicts between two states. It's not what's happening here. However, there is sort of an offshoot of or an arm of the law of armed conflict called customary international law, which is basically practices that have been so ingrained on the battlefield, basically by states observing certain provisions that they technically might not have a legal obligation on the books somewhere to follow, but because of that long-standing practice and tradition, it is treated as an obligation. It is a custom at this point. And so while the portions of the Geneva Conventions dealing with the treatment of sick and wounded on the battlefield, Crosshair fitting somewhat into that category here, wouldn't apply to this situation. There is an argument. It's hard to kind of classify what the Bad Batch is. They're just sort of this rogue element. They're not like they're kind of a non-state armed group, but they're just them. But you could make the argument that under customary international law, there's this general requirement that the wounded and sick shall be collected and cared for. Now, the caveat there is the same one that I brought up before, which is that the law of armed conflict does not impose a duty like that in situations that would also get you killed. There's a recognition of the reality on the ground, which is that obligation exists, but it's not self-defeating, because requiring you or requiring Omega in this instance or the rest of the Bad Batch to go save him to the point where they all get killed as well, or they all get wounded, and therefore you're increasing suffering on the battlefield. That sort of is a self-defeating requirement there. So I think you end up in the same place analysis wise. I don't know that they had the absolute obligation there, but it is that's something that could trigger a duty in the absence of, say, a civilian law.
Yeah, it is a fascinating discussion for a torts professor to get into. Because
there's also a Paul's graph sort of analysis too of, this is a train going off the rails, and there's a lot of lack of foreseeability along the way. So if, we have a duty not to push Mrs. Paulgraf, do we, without knowing, or was it push the person into the train? And did we know that was going to set off a firework that was going to hurt Mrs. Paulgraf? Did we know that saving Crosshair was going to put us in this position later on down the line, and making sure that foreseeability was in place? I think a torts professor might have a lot of fun with that as well.
What was also 100% foreseeable was Crosshair complaining the rest of the episode about every single thing.
Yeah, I have a slightly different perspective on carrying him out, and that's thinking in terms of a firefighter who goes into a burning building, because that environment's going to be changing while they're extracting the person from the fire. And if debris collapses and a way out, causes them to drop the rescuee, they might need to regroup in order to gain control of the rescuee again in order to make their way out of the building. And that could be an intervening cause, but I do think it's part of the analysis here, because the aerial bombardment is an intervening cause that knocks them all down and is causing the facility to sink faster. But that's the way my mind works with this, which brings us to the other issue that we have with, let's fast forward, and we have Crosshair and Hunter and everyone on the surface, and AZ trying to help Omega out of the debris field. and his battery runs out, and she goes out to, swims in God knows what the pressure is, and that the wind isn't knocked out of her little lungs while after opening the doors. So that's cool. Good swimmer, good endurance. But Crosshairs takes the shot to rescue them, which, when you think about it, making a shot through the ocean does take really good vision. So hats off there for pulling that off.
Star Wars physics at work.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, because it's dark and so cool. And we've seen that weapon have a grappling hook before, so like that's not new. So like that wasn't a MacGuffin just out of the blue. So like they had it before. But that raises a fun issue with him on whether or not he had a duty to do that and to rescue her. And AZ, and this is nice to see, they didn't leave the droid to die. So that's cute that he makes it out this time. But Christina, help us with this, because this is the second time we talk about duty to rescue in the same episode.
I think that he, again, had a moral duty, and he talks about it. He was, later says that we're even, and he felt that he had an obligation. So, I mean, I think that was what was driving him more than anything else. And we've seen before that he doesn't really give a crap about legal obligations outside of the Empire. And even then, I don't think he necessarily, he takes his own interpretation on some of the orders that he's given, I think. But with regard to AZ, absolutely not. I don't think. It's, again, a droid. It's not a person. And I was absolutely convinced that AZ was not going to make it through. I just, I was pleasantly surprised that he made it to the end, because I was convinced that this was a droid that I really liked and I was never going to see again. So I'm really actually kind of happy that he's going to be part of season 2, I assume. But, I don't think he had a particular obligation other than his own, kind of feelings about it. And also that he might have also felt that, he was already in pretty deep crap with the rest of his squad. And if he had the ability to help her out, then maybe that would put him in a less perilous situation with them.
Yeah, it's amazing what just a little bit of like his eyes flickering did to ramp up the tension there. I really thought that was going to be like an emotionally wrecking closure to the Clone Wars. Not only are you losing to Focus City, but you're losing AZ, who had sort of a key role toward the end of that show, and certainly in this one. But yeah, there's no legal duty to rescue personal property. Like if my car is on fire, there's nobody that's going to be required to, maybe put it out for safety purposes. You could say like a firefighter, but the Bad Batch is under no obligation, nor is Omega, to save him. Christine is spot on that's just a moral thing there. Omega is interesting because she's clearly, she has made a decision from the heart once again and put herself in peril. The other, by virtue of the fact of their we've talked about this before, but there's like in loco parentis status. You could argue that Hunter or one of the others had some duty to dive in and go after her, save her from this situation. But Crosshair has never been in that scenario. He doesn't automatically step into those shoes because he was rescued and he's accompanying the group. So I don't think you can extend any kind of duty under that analysis to Crosshair without some more facts and more development here. Really, Star Wars has this powerful, like, non-legal concept of like the law of I owe you one. And you see it with like Han and Luke back and forth and just various characters, Jar Jar and Qui-Gon, where it's, when you save somebody, there's this powerful debt that is owed, so to speak, sometimes like in the case of Chewbacca for your entire life. And I think that's what was driving this and some more story type elements surrounding redemption and this sort of thing that'll play out in future episodes. But certainly Crosshair didn't have a legal duty. And that's sort of the classic example of why a legal duty or the absence thereof can be kind of heartbreaking at times, because theoretically he could have done nothing and had no legal consequences to flow from that. Like, we had a grappling hook, you've got this supervision you could have, but did the law require you to do that? And the answer here is no.
I got the impression that had he not done that, Hunter would have dove in after her.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I think that she would have been okay either way. But you're right. I mean, it's no obligation whatsoever.
Yeah, AZ might have been another factor because he's a big anchor at this point, and I don't know if Hunter would have muscled him up too. So that's a big ask. But again, the little droid that could, I thought we lost him in the Fives arc. So the fact that it's like, oh, he's back. Oh, we're going to watch him die. This is
oh no.
watch the lights go out. So it's like bummer. But no, he made it. And so now there are 2 droids on that ship who both have saved the day at least once. So good. Those are the big issues with our heroes. And then at the end, we get to see Nala Se, who's now going to be used as slave labor by the Empire, which raises all kinds of war crimey type issues. Tom, as the JAG officer and law war expert, your reaction to using a prisoner that way?
Yeah, so frowned upon would be the gentle way to put it. There's a world in which prisoners during armed conflict are used and are able to work in their prior capacity. So prisoners of war and that entire body of law, you will see requirements within international law that those prisoners be allowed to do certain jobs. Certain prisoners with skills, say a doctor, for example, if you have a doctor who's a uniformed soldier and is captured, that doctor can be put to work, should be put to work in that capacity. That's not the case here. She's not a prisoner of war. She is just a kidnapped individual who has been unlawfully detained by a government and is now being pressed very literally into service. And so there's no provision under these facts that would allow the Empire to do what it did. If we were still on Tapoka City and the Empire had continued its occupation of Kamino, as we talked about before, then you could have a scenario in which the Empire is directing efforts. Those citizens are still allowed to work because, again, she's not a combatant, she's not a fighter. But in the context of an occupation of a planet or a city, an area, country, citizens are allowed to go about, and the law requires that they, to the extent possible, be allowed to continue working and sort of operating normally or as normally as possible. Again, that's not, you've got a forced relocation here to some unknown, unnamed facility, and it's specifically to carry on a very nefarious, presumably, set of work for the Empire. So this is just straight kidnapping and just unlawful actions all the way around. Yeah, so there was an interesting nugget, a good teaser for next season, I think.
But that base does look cool. I mean, carved into a mountain, that is pretty groovy looking.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a huge problem. Those are the big issues. And again, it's a survival episode about don't drown, don't get crushed by the pressure, and make it off the ocean floor. So
Or eaten by the massive monster that's trying to get to them.
Yeah, the Meg moment, or the Jaws 3D moment of the episode. But it does raise a philosophical discussion point of, can Crosshair ever be redeemed? And that's a huge theme in Star Wars. And when we think about his chip got enhanced, he ordered civilians to be fired upon, with a flamethrower. Like he did a lot of bad stuff, killing people, and including shooting members of his own team. Parts of that, it's like I could see us defending him because of the insanity defense because of the chip. We have the chip out at some unknown period. How do you redeem a guy? Is it even possible? For someone who's bought hook, line, and sinker into I like order and I'm willing to make it happen. Christina, your
Well, he
thoughts
doesn't.
first.
He doesn't have the convenient. I was drawn by the dark side that Anakin Skywalker and Ben Solo had for their redemption arcs, or Quinlan Voss, or numerous, or I guess even Ventress, Saj Ventress, which has been the predominant redemption sort of route in Star Wars. But it is Star Wars, and redemption is a big thing. I think that I think for Crosshair, it's going to have to be a crisis of conscious, where as he progresses through the Empire, he sees more and more that he objects to. But I don't know what his level is going to be, what his breaking point would be, because he seems to be perfectly happy to do anything that he thinks might ingratiate himself into the Empire. And maybe it's that finally the Empire just says, we don't really want you. You are a clone, and we are anti-clone now. And that might be the thing that sends him, even spiraling even more and needing to be saved by his brothers.
Thomas?
I think I hope that we see a non-traditional arc for him. He made me want to shake him by the shoulder armor throughout this whole episode. Just be like, do you see how good they are for you? And you just won't take a hint and won't do the right thing and just join back up with them. But I kind of think he's going to run a similar arc to Agent Callus in Rebels, where Callus is this very stalwart ISB agent, participated in numerous atrocities, not the least of which was directly affected one of the main characters, Zeb, in that show, and just as like one of the most fanatical people as they come. But as the series went on, he sort of realized and saw the Empire to kind of strip down to its parts, what it really was, and just how lonely an existence you have, because the Empire is this entity that commands and demands your loyalty, but doesn't repay that with anything other than more demands. And I think that's where Crosshair is going to find himself, because he's going to continually be put into situations where potentially he's going to have more of a nefarious role when it comes to whatever is happening with the rest of the clones. And, he's, a very cold individual, but he's not an individual without emotion. And I think there's going to come a moment where he's left completely out in the cold by the Empire. And while I don't think he joins back up and just like everything's kumbaya with the Bad Batch, I do think there's some sort of like heroic moment in his future, because at this point in Star Wars lore, no one is unsavable, so to speak. Anyone can come back and work an arc back to the light side. And so I think that'll happen for Crosshair. I just don't want to see it campy like by season 3 where like the gang's all back together again and Crosshair is just like a nice guy again.
So as I thought about this, there are the different extremes. So in Resistance, we have Griff, who made the comment about like going back for people, and the comment, maybe that's why we lost. So you have someone, the older Imperial, who has a very different view on the world decades later, to someone who's bought into it. And the Callus comparison is interesting because Callus joined the Empire. It's his arc is 15 years further down the line from this story, and he believes that the Empire is bringing peace and prosperity to the universe, And that slowly gets shattered as he starts seeing things he doesn't like. And that's despite the fact he engages in what probably was a war crime with what happened with Zeb's people, who I'm blanking on their species.
Little Sot.
Yes.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember. Good job. The Lasat.
That's why we're a good team.
Exactly. It's so cool that like Callus got there eventually. Crosshair has participated in war crimes already. And now knowingly coming back from that, I mean, that's rough. I mean, when you think of Hux, who ordered the destruction of the New Republic, I mean, like full-on war criminal. And in Rise of Skywalker, he's the informant because he doesn't want Kylo Ren to win. Like, there was no redemption there besides, I just want to screw the guy in charge. Like, he didn't realize, oops-a-daisy, I wiped out a civilization. No, it's, I just want to screw this guy who's
I
only
don't like him very much.
Who's only
He's
going to
mean
bring
to me.
He hurt my feelings. So, despite Snoke smacking him around in public. So, yeah. Yeah, I find this complicated. Because he's already seen things that would make a normal person turn away. What more does it take? Like, you ordered someone to use a flamethrower on children. How do you make the pilgrimage back from that of like, whoa, I was wrong?
Well, he seems to be driven by self-interest to some extent. At least that's his justification for sticking with the Empire, is that he has self-interest in mind. And so I suspect that self-interest at some point will be a driving factor in his disillusionment with the Empire, which doesn't mean that it makes him a good guy all of a sudden, but it takes him away from the path that he's on right now. And then he has to figure out his own path, because he is what he claims to be as a good soldier. I think it's going to be very difficult for him to find a path that isn't part of the Empire, but also is a good soldier. And that's where I think his crisis of conscience might come into play, and trying to figure out how his self-interest works in that context.
The rebellion hasn't formed yet. So if there wasn't another military to go join or to defect to, I don't know who that is, if there's anyone at this point, because the Empire is the bully on the block that's calling the shots. So it's an interesting question, because I don't. Star Wars will find a way to have him redeemed. I just think it's a long journey back after what he's done willingly.
Well, it could be redemption and then immediate explosion that kind of wraps up his story. That's sometimes how it goes.
But that's too convenient, and because you've done that with Vader and Ben Solo, of oops, I will not face the consequences of my actions thanks to death. It's like, well, that's a cop out of. It's like same with Hux. It's like, again, shot by Richard E. Grant. Okay, cool. Like, where you don't face the fact you were participated in genocide.
Well, there's also the option, I suppose, of going halfway there, where he leaves the Empire and goes. I mean, his skill set is to be a mercenary, quite honestly, or an assassin. And there are plenty of opportunities for him out there if he just looks at the galaxy. And it could be that he rejects the Empire, and the Bad Batch aren't quite. They're more smuggler types than mercenary types. They're kind of like the A-Team, really, on the spectrum of the scum and villainy. But I could see him finding out about the assassin mercenary side of things and saying, wait, this is exactly what I was made for, which is a kind of a halfway redemption, and kind of like Hondo, who's not exactly redeemed, but he's still gonna double cross you, but he's in much better than he was when we first met him in the Clone Wars early on.
So he retires to a nice job of killing people for money, and that's his that's his arc. That seems highly plausible, actually. So I wouldn't be surprised if it ends that way for him.
I want to give a shout out to one of our longtime listeners, Aaron, who reached out to me. Aaron, I haven't responded to you yet, so this is my response to you, because I watched the episode late this weekend and didn't want to get spoiled looking at your prediction here. But Aaron questioned whether the scene at the end, so we don't know what planet that facility is on that Nala Se is brought to. Aaron speculated, and I think potentially rightfully so, whether this is a planet called Wayland, and whether that mountain that you see is called Mount Tantus, which, if you remember back to the Heir to the Empire series back in '91, the original Thrawn series, the Emperor had Palpatine had a secret storehouse built here, built into Mount Tantus. It's like the place where all sorts of dark things happened and whatnot. And Wayland is canon. It's not been featured heavily in anything, but it's been brought back into modern canon. I think it was the Darth Vader VR game mentioned it. It was mentioned that the Emperor had some sort of storehouse or like a collection of artifacts on Wayland. So that, given Filoni's penchant for bringing stuff forward out of Legends, I think that might be the best, most astute prediction that I've heard yet for season 2, but we shall see.
That is fantastic.
One kind of callback that I was reminded of was my least favorite arc of the Clone Wars, which is the Zillo Beast, because it makes me really, really sad. Just the Empire or the Emperor showing his willingness to experiment with things off book. And that made me think that, we may or may not ever see what happens with Nala Se, like we never ever saw again what happened with the Zillo Beast and the experimentation that happened there. But maybe we'll see it come up again, because like you said, Filoni likes to call back to things. But it was what I was reminded of when I saw this kind of secret scientific facility, which was clearly, involved with manipulation of beings. And then obviously the symbol on the shoulder of the, which we later see in The Mandalorian.
Also shout out to Aaron, who made that patch.
So, that obviously, and then my husband and I were talking about the fact that we have no idea where Grogu is right now. And he may or may not be in there. I doubt it, because I would imagine that the Empire would have already extracted what they needed from him. But, it was something that we kind of talked about a little bit after this episode.
So I was about to bring up Zillo Beast, because that would make sense if they do make a clone of it, and if that's what they're experimenting on. And that giant mountain that could hide a kaiju, that seems totally on par with Crazy Secret Evil Lab. I also want to believe that Grogu was saved by R2-D2, which is why R2 does the happy dance when he sees Grogu in the last episode of The Mandalorian. But that's my fan fiction. Others have articulated it. I love that story. So Anakin slaughtering children, R2 gets Grogu out of there. That's what I want to believe. So, yeah. A lot going on. But what did you think of this series overall, since we're here at the end? And Christina, you first.
I absolutely loved it. To me, it seemed like an extension of the last episode, or the last season of the Clone Wars, which was one of my favorite of the Clone Wars. My favorite Star Wars animation has been Rebels. And I think it still is Rebels, because I'm really, really attached to those characters. But I really, really have liked the Bad Batch a lot. I think that there's a lot of depth of character. I wasn't really, they were just archetypes when they were first introduced. And I think they're fleshed out very, very well. They all have unique and interesting personalities. I was a little worried that Echo and Tech were a little too similar in their kind of basic characteristics, but I really just, I think everybody was really well developed, and you got to give a shout out to G. Bradley Baker for just making amazing characters and bringing them to life.
Tom, your thoughts?
I really enjoyed how this show completely subverted expectations. Christina hit the nail on the head in that regard. But I thoroughly like this show in this for the same reasons that I really like Rogue One, which is that whereas Rogue One really stripped this like veneer of squeaky cleanness off the rebellion and showed them as this motley crew of folks that weren't always doing the right thing despite their desire to restore righteousness to the galaxy. The ends sometimes justify different means, some less than savory means. You saw that same thing here with the Empire. You saw some pretty dastardly stuff, and we've seen the Empire do lots of bad things, but not in this period. Seeing the Empire in the nuggets that we got, the way in which it maneuvered itself as an organization, as an entity, and just some of the lengths at which they were willing to go to, not involving super lasers, not involving these like massive weapons or anything like that, but just like ground level awfulness. It's not pleasant to watch. It's not like, it doesn't make me happy, but it makes them that much easier to root against, because you see just how much they were turning the screws on the galaxy. And so when you go back and you watch a movie like A New Hope, and you hear a line from Leia like, the more you tighten your grip, the more starships will slip through your fingers. To me, I go back and that line suddenly has that much more meaning because of a show like this and because of the things that we saw. So I really appreciated everything about the main characters, and I'm a huge Omega fan at this point. But what I really liked was that background, like the political stuff, the real Rampart was fantastic. All that underpinning was really, really what made it for me.
Yeah, I love this. I wasn't sure what to expect initially, because it's like, what are we going to get? And this was, I thought, well defined. It did not rehash anything that had been done before. It was, let's tell small stories, let's tell big stories. Let's tell stories where the main characters only appear for like 1 minute, and that's how we see them in that one episode. I'm like, all of that was very creative, and I enjoyed it thoroughly each week. So again, and this turned into watching it before work on Friday mornings, which I didn't do with the Clone Wars. So yeah, I found it very engaging, and with a lot of issues for us to discuss.
A surprising amount. This is the lightest episode that we've had out of 15, and we've gotten into some new territory on the podcast. I never would have guessed that, even compared to a show like The Mandalorian, that we'd have this much to discuss. I mean, there were episodes where I was like, man, we're gonna run like a 2-hour episode, or we're gonna be like a rock skipping across the top of the water and just acknowledge certain things for time. I wonder assuming COVID doesn't scramble Celebration plans, whether we're going to get a little premiere of an episode or two at Celebration in May.
We can hope. And Delta is a factor, but I have hope that vaccination rates have gone up. People are, catching on. But I do think there's going to have to be mandates for vaccinations in order for people to actually get the shot, so they don't
ruin this for me. I need it.
Yeah, it's like, don't be a schmuck. Arnold was right. On top of that, this series handled a child as a main character very well. There's always the risk of having the Wesley Crusher syndrome, where everyone, and again, the banging makes sense, because it's just like It's like Wesley saves the day again. It's like, oh, stop it. It's like no one's that talented all the time. And this was a good mix of, she wasn't obnoxious. She was the conscious of the crew, and that was well done. Her skills continued to improve throughout the season. And as she learned more things, and she was the one who would always stood for making the right decision and going like, hey, this is wrong, we should go help people. And that was just very well done. It's like people were annoyed with Ezra at the beginning. I was not, but there were those who were. Like, there's none of that with her. She was a nice, well-defined character out of the gate.
You know, one of the things they did this episode to remind us of that was her interactions with Crosshair over and over and over again, of going over and talking to him in a way that she had done with the others over the course of the series. And that is something that was nice to see, that if she had had more time with him, maybe she could have gotten through to him. And maybe ultimately she's going to be the one, not his brothers, but her, that can see through his facade and his armor and get through, because she has a different sort of relationship. There's a slightly maternal side of it, which kind of makes sense now, given that she's the older one of them. She's been watching them since they were in the pods or whatever. So that it's an interesting little twist that they put in there.
That kind of broke my brain. I was like trying to do the counting. I was like, oh, it makes complete sense, but here I am, like having to pause, and like it's like one of the scenes in the movies where the equations are floating above my head. What I think, Christia, you hit on a little bit of this, but like what I really like about Omega, and Josh hit on this as well, but it would have been too easy for her to just be molded to the Bad Batch's mentality. In the same vein that it would have been really easy to take Ahsoka and just make her like Anakin Jr. throughout this the arc of the Clone Wars, and that's the exact opposite of what happened. What happened here, and what I think one of the strongest points of the show is the Bad Batch molded to her image. And so you see things like Wrecker have his inner child brought out in him. The things like Hunter sort of lose this like icy cold facade. Things like Crosshair, quite frankly, be moved to actually rescue somebody, do a nice thing. And you never see Omega sort of short circuit her own ideals, her own values, even when it really imperils the crew or imperils herself. And saving AZ was a perfect example of that. I mean, they knew when they launched out of those tubes that his batteries was running low, this, that, and the other, and this was probably going to be the last hurrah for this droid. Yet she still goes back for him. And the crew doesn't say like, oh, Omega, not you again. You've put us into this situation again. It's no, that's who she is. And like, that's a massive value to us. We now see the value in that sort of thing. These, we being beings that were just engineered to fight war and defeat the enemy and kill our opponents. So that is the single biggest strength of her character. And to me, to anybody that sits here and complains like, well, she just does these silly things over and over again, and it's just a recycled sort of character arc that she has the whole time. I'm like, well, A, she's a kid, but B, that's the point. You're missing it. That's the point. And the point is the development that causes in these soldiers that know nothing else but war. And now they see humanity. Now they see redemptive qualities. That's why Crosshair, fires that bolt into the water and saves her, not because he owes her one.
Excellent observations. It's kind of like the Ted Lasso effect, that the positive person impacts others.
I might have. There we go. Unfrozen now.
Okay. As I said, it's the Ted Lasso effect. The positive person,
right,
impacting others to be better. One quality about her is she never hesitates to do the right thing. So with going after EZ, it's I'm going after EZ, and the look of determination that they drew on her face was fearless. It was, I'm not waiting. And she hits the button that lets the tube flood with a rush of water. It's not like a gradual, it's, and she's swimming after an anchor to pull him up. And the fact that with animation they can do wet hair well, that's cool, because like watching her swim and the hair going, it's like, okay, like 20 years ago that would have been super difficult to have pulled off. So again, great visual storytelling with her, of someone who has a clear moral center and doesn't hesitate to do the right thing, which is a great image for kids who are watching this, to have that self-assurance that like being moral isn't a questionable action. So again, just really well done.
Yeah, there were a lot of just like really, this particular episode, again, the animation was top notch. Again, I'm just like watching lights flashing and thinking, oh my God, how did they do this? And stuff like that. And one little tiny gesture that I thought was really interesting was at the very end, when the ARC trooper is reporting to Rampart that the city has been destroyed, and he sort of stutters because he was affected by the destruction of his home, but continued on. I thought was a really nice touch.
That's a great point.
And watching all of the clones having, watching the city, all the Bad Batch watching the city kind of not be there anymore. And Omega seemed to be the most affected by it, probably because she lived there the longest. But it might have also been because, she wasn't ever going to go back. There wasn't ever, and they promised her that would be the case. But it seemed like she had a little bit of nostalgia for seeing this place destroyed, or the place that she knew the best. But that one ARC trooper just really kind of made it really interesting to me that, it's not just Clone Force 99 that is affected by this, but it's the entire clone army that might be having a little bit of trouble with this if they knew about it. I don't know to what extent that they do know about it, but there is a conflict there.
Well, again, the best way to recruit for the rebellion is from the Imperial Army of clone troopers who are not cool with what's going on, because that should still have, unless they're fanatical because of the chip, like they should be bothering anyone with a moral center of was not what I was made to do. This is not who we are, and I don't like it. And I caught that as well, in addition to the gunners who were dutifully following orders. But again, they found a way to tell small stories as opposed to like everything's the galactic, hegemonic war, where like we lose this and all of society's over. It's, the details are important. The small stories are important, that where characters' arcs are shaped and understood. And they did this well. So with that, I look forward to season 2. And next month we get Visions, which starts, I think, September 22nd. So I am super excited to see anime style Star Wars stories that look like an anthology series. So can't wait. That preview looked pretty sweet. And Lord knows when we get Andor, but I can't wait for that one either.
Yeah, they had a bit of a sizzle reel trailer that didn't have any actual footage. It had some concept art and set photos last week. When it popped up on my phone, it said like Andor trailer, and I like literally dropped everything that was in my hands. Not my kids, but
Good.
things. And but yeah, still some cool behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, I think that D23 is this week or next week, so I think that there might be some announcements coming out.
Oh,
from that, I would imagine.
Good.
Excellent. I needed to hear that. So like that, I mean, that makes sense. One series just ends. Now's the time to roll out prep for getting everyone hyped up for the future. So,
That's right.
but I enjoyed seeing Luke's yellow jacket, like a rack of them, showing like those were common. It's like, or they just made a bunch for one character. It's like, oh, that's cool. So neato. But again, can't wait for that. And there's been some scuttlebutt from Kenobi about it's big and complicated, and Deborah Chow's in charge and handling it. So all good things. So again, we're going to get live action and animated Star Wars for years, and I couldn't be happier about it.
I was wrong about D23. It's usually at this time of year, but I think they moved it to November. So
Then part of me just died.
Gives them more time.
sorry.
It gives them more time. Maybe we get a trailer. Maybe a trailer's not realistic this week, but maybe in November we can.
It's,
Fingers crossed.
you know, we'll find out. There's also San Diego Comic-Con special edition. That could be a time to have some fun stuff come out. So lots of options.
I think we're going to be overwhelmed pretty soon.
Yeah, there's no need to be anxious.
Tsunami's coming.
It's cool. No one panic. Stay calm and watch Star Wars. So with that, everyone, please leave a review wherever you listen to us. We appreciate you coming on this journey with us. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Take care.